The room went completely silent the moment my father opened his mouth. "My daughter's greatest talent is doing absolutely nothing," he said with a loud booming laugh, one hand gripping a glass of red wine, and the other resting heavily on my shoulder. The groom's relatives burst into laughter, immediately sharp and eager, the kind of laughter people use when they want to prove they belong. Crystal clinked silverware paused mid-air, and for one excruciating second, I stood there in my Marine Corps dress blues, 36 years old, a lieutenant colonel with 18 years of service, feeling like that awkward, overweight teenager all over again. Then the laughter died, as every single groomsman at the table rose to their feet. Sir Staff Sergeant Ramirez said, his voice steady and respectful but firm with all due respect, "She's our commanding officer." My father froze wine glass halfway to his lips. Wait. What? The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the ice shifting in someone's whiskey glass. No one laughed this time. The private dining room at Romano's Steakhouse in Pinehurst smelled of seared ribeye, garlic butter, expensive cologne, and old money trying too hard. Warm light from the chandeliers reflected off polished wood and crisp white tablecloths. I had been standing near the head table in my uniform hands clasped behind my back, the way years of discipline had trained me when my father decided to introduce me to the groom's extended family. Emily, my younger sister, looked mortified beside her fiancé Trevor. Her blonde hair caught the light perfectly, as it always did. She had always been the easy one, the graceful one. I was the tall, broad-shouldered older daughter who never quite fit the picture my father wanted. Earl Hayes, owner of Hayes Auto Repair for 43 years, loved an audience. Tonight he had one, and he used it. Rebecca here, he continued trying to recover with a chuckle that now sounded forced. She's been in the Marines forever, but between us she's always had that special talent for, well, you know. He waved his hand vaguely. A few people tittered nervously. But the groomsmen, my Marines, didn't sit down. They stood straighter. Captain Morales spoke next, voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes led our logistics command during the hurricane evacuations 3 years ago, saved dozens of lives, including several of ours. She's one of the finest officers I've ever served under. My face burned, not from embarrassment this time, but from something deeper, years of swallowed anger rising too fast. I kept my expression neutral, the way only long years in uniform can teach you. My father blinked rapidly, the wine glass trembling slightly in his hand. For the first time in a long while, Earl Hayes looked small. I set my napkin on the table with deliberate care. "Congratulations again, Emily," I said softly to my sister, my voice steady despite the storm inside. Then I walked out. The August night air outside was thick and humid, the kind of North Carolina heat that clings to your skin even after sunset. Pine trees whispered in the distance as I loosened the collar of my dress blues and stepped toward the valet. Behind me, the muffled sound of raised voices spilled from the restaurant. I didn't turn around. At 36, I had coordinated massive supply chains in disaster zones, slept in flooded tents, buried good Marines, and once directed evacuation efforts for 18 straight hours while soaked to the bone. Yet nothing hollowed me out quite like my father's voice. Lazy, useless, good for nothing. Those words had followed me my entire life. Growing up, my father believed criticism was character building. World's tough Becca. Better toughen up, he'd say. But the toughness was reserved mostly for me. Emily was the sunshine child, easy smile, natural grace, the one he proudly showed off at church picnics. I was the one who grew too tall, too broad, too quiet. After Mom died when I was 25, food became my quiet comfort during lonely deployments. The weight came slowly, steadily. Enough for Dad to notice. Enough for the jokes at every family gathering. Still, I kept coming home. Family has a strange pull like that. My phone buzzed as I reached the parking lot. "Emily," I answered. "Becca, please don't leave. I already did." She exhaled shakily. "Dad's losing it in there. That makes 2 of us." The drive to Grandma Lorraine's old farmhouse took 25 minutes along dark 2-lane roads, lined with tall Carolina pines. Crickets sang loudly in the humid night. I rolled down the truck window and let the warm air wash over me. Old memories rode shotgun the whole way, Dad teaching Emily to dance in the kitchen while I washed dishes, Dad laughing when I announced I was enlisting. You in the Marines. Lord help America, he'd said. America had done just fine. The farmhouse smelled of cedar and aged wood when I unlocked the door. Dust danced in the moonlight across worn floorboards. I changed out of my uniform, hanging the jacket carefully so the metals caught the light. Dad had never asked what any of them meant. Around midnight, headlights swept up the gravel drive. Emily arrived carrying a grocery bag, mascara already streaked beneath her eyes. I brought pie, she said weakly. Of course she did. Pie was Emily's answer to every crisis. We sat at Grandma's old kitchen table eating store-bought pecan pie while the ceiling fan rattled overhead. The weight of the evening pressed down on both of us. For the first time in years, I let myself feel the full depth of the exhaustion that came not from combat, but from carrying my father's disappointment for 3 decades. The next morning arrived gray and heavy with humidity. I barely slept, the old farmhouse creaking around me like it carried its own memories. Rain from the previous night still dripped from the tin roof in slow, rhythmic taps. I sat on the porch, wrapped in an old Marine Corps sweatshirt, drinking black coffee that had gone lukewarm, staring out at the silver-wet fields. That place had always felt like the one honest corner of my childhood. No judgments, no performances. Just Grandma Lorraine's quiet wisdom and the smell of biscuits in the oven. Emily stepped outside, wearing one of Grandma's faded quilts around her shoulders. She looked smaller than usual, eyes puffy from crying. You always wake up early, she murmured, settling beside me on the porch swing. Military ruined me for sleeping in, I replied with a faint smile. For a long while we listened to the rain and the distant call of morning birds. Then Emily spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Dad's in real trouble, Becca. I turned to look at her. What kind of trouble? The garage and the house. She twisted her hands in her lap. He borrowed money. A lot of it. Mortgaged the garage, took loans on equipment we don't need, even Grandma's farmhouse. The words landed like a physical blow. I set the coffee mug down carefully so my hands wouldn't shake. That old white farmhouse with its peeling paint and wraparound porch wasn't just property. It was the last place I still felt safe as a child. The thought of my father risking it to keep up appearances made something cold settle deep in my chest. He told Trevor's parents the business was booming. Emily continued, voice cracking. Bought new lifts, leased heavy trucks, threw parties for suppliers. All while the chain shops down the highway were taking half his customers. He's been drowning for over a year. I stared at the wet fields, memories flashing. Saturday mornings, sweeping oil-stained floors at the garage while country music played on an old radio. Dad arguing with customers, grease on his hands, pride in his eyes. Hayes Auto Repair wasn't just a business. It was his identity. And now it was crumbling. Later that morning I drove into town. Pinehurst looked the same as always. Pickup trucks parked outside diners, retirees waving from benches, church signs advertising potlucks and prayer meetings. Normal life moving forward while mine felt like it was cracking open again. I stopped at Miller's Diner. The bell above the door jingled and several heads turned. Whispers followed me to a booth near the window. Small towns never forget, especially not after a scene like last night. Captain Hayes, a familiar voice called. Marcus Reed stood up from his usual spot, coffee mug in hand. Time had deepened the lines around his eyes, but his broad shoulders and steady firefighter posture remained. We had gone to school together, him 2 years ahead, the town golden boy who later lost his wife to cancer. He slid into the seat across from me without asking. You okay? He asked quietly after the waitress poured fresh coffee. Nope. He gave a low chuckle. Heard about the dinner. Whole town's buzzing. Of course they are. I rubbed my forehead. The exhaustion from last night had settled into my bones. Marcus studied me carefully. Your father always did confuse being loud with being right. He paused, stirring his coffee slowly. The garage is worse than people think. He's been borrowing against everything. Pride won't let him downsize. Instead, he doubled down trying to look successful. I felt sick. Emily told me last night. Marcus nodded. Half the town knows. Suppliers are calling in debts, banks circling. He looked out the rain-streaked window. You thinking about helping him? The question hung between us. Part of me, the daughter who had spent years trying to earn approval, wanted to fix everything. But another part, the one forged in deployments and long nights of self-doubt, felt something darker stirring. A quiet, cold desire to let him finally feel the weight he had placed on me for decades. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe he needs to face it. 2 days later, the call came while I was clearing brush around the farmhouse. Emily's voice was panicked. Dad collapsed at the garage. Ambulance took him to Moore Regional. Everything inside me went still. I drove to the hospital in a blur, Marcus meeting me in the waiting room. Emily sat curled in a plastic chair looking lost. When the doctor finally spoke, it wasn't a full heart attack, just a severe warning. Years of stress, high blood pressure, poor diet, and refusing to slow down. Dad looked smaller in that hospital bed, machines beeping softly around him. His face was pale, shoulders sunken. When he saw me in the doorway, embarrassment flickered across his features before the familiar defensiveness returned. You don't have to stand there looking at me like I'm already gone, he muttered. You scared Emily, I said quietly. He looked away toward the television. Silence stretched between us until an old veteran from the community, Mr. Calvin Brewer, stopped by. He recognized me immediately and spoke with genuine warmth about my service during the last major hurricane relief. Dad listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. For the first time, I saw something crack in my father's eyes, not quite shame yet, but close. A glimpse of the man realizing the daughter he had dismissed for years was respected by men his own age. He came home from the hospital with strict orders, less stress, better diet, more rest. Emily stayed at the family house to watch him, but I returned to Grandma's farmhouse. Distance felt necessary, safer. That evening, I went through some of Grandma's old things in the dining room. Tucked inside one of her recipe books was a thin envelope with my name written in Mom's careful handwriting. My heart squeezed. Mom had been gone 11 years, but her presence still felt close in that house. I opened it slowly. Inside was a letter and bank documents. The first lines blurred through sudden tears. Becca, if you're reading this, I waited too long to say these things out loud. Your father loves you, but he doesn't always know how to love gently. You were never a disappointment, never too much. This money is yours, your inheritance from me and Grandma. It's not for rescuing others from consequences. It's for giving you choices. Mom had known. She had seen everything coming and tried to protect me in the only way she could. I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands. The financial safety net explained how I had managed deployments and investments so carefully. But more than the money, it was the validation I had craved my whole life, proof that someone had seen me clearly. Later that night, alone on the porch, the revenge began to take shape in my mind. Not loud or cruel, quiet, controlled. Let him feel the consequences he had earned. Let him taste the helplessness I had swallowed for 30 years. But Emily's wedding was only days away, and despite everything, she didn't deserve to suffer for our father's pride. The storm inside me deepened. For the first time, I held real power. And I wasn't sure I wanted to be merciful. The letter stayed with me for days, tucked inside the pocket of my sweatshirt, like a secret I wasn't ready to share with the world. Every time I moved, I felt the paper crinkle against my chest, a quiet reminder that someone had once seen me clearly. Mom's words echoed in the quiet moments, especially at night when the farmhouse settled, and the cicadas sang their relentless summer song. She had known my father's sharp edges better than anyone. She had also known he might one day try to break me with them. I spent long hours walking the overgrown property, the tall grass brushing against my jeans, the scent of damp earth and pine resin heavy in the air. Part of me wanted to drive straight to the family house, hand my father the bank statements, and watch his face as he realized how wrong he had been about me for 36 years. Another part, the colder, quieter part that had learned to survive in a man's world, whispered something darker. Let him feel it. Let him taste the helplessness. Let him stand in the same shame he had forced on me at dinner tables, holiday gatherings, and quiet Sunday mornings my entire life. But Emily's wedding was 3 days away. She came by the farmhouse the next afternoon, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. We sat at the old kitchen table again, sunlight slanting through dusty windows, illuminating the worn oak surface, where Grandma had rolled out pie dough for decades. Emily pushed a stack of unpaid invoices toward me with trembling fingers. The caterer called again. The florist needs final payment by tomorrow or they cancel. Trevor's parents. They're asking questions. They think we're hiding something. Her voice broke. I'm not asking for Dad, Becca. I'm asking for me. I just want one day that isn't ruined. I looked at my little sister, still the sunshine girl even now, and felt the familiar pull of family duty war, with the anger burning low in my gut. Mom's letter had been clear. This money is not meant to rescue others from consequences. Yet life rarely offered clean choices. Emily had never been the target of our father's cruelty the way I had. She had simply lived in its shadow. I'll handle it, I said, finally, my voice steady. Emily's eyes widened. What? How? You don't need to know the details. Just know the wedding will happen. But, Emily, I held her gaze. Dad gets no credit for this. And he never finds out where the money came from. Understood, she nodded rapidly, fresh tears spilling over. Thank you, Becca. I don't deserve you. You deserve a beautiful wedding, I replied softly. That's all. Over the next 36 hours, I moved like I was coordinating a logistics operation in a combat zone. Years of military planning made it almost too easy. I wired money to the caterer, the florist, the reception hall, and the photographer. I called in a few discreet favors from contacts who owed me from past deployments. No announcements, no dramatic rescues, just quiet, efficient resolution the same way I had moved thousands of tons of supplies through hurricane-flooded roads without fanfare. Each payment felt like a small, deliberate act. Not full mercy, not total revenge. Something in between. A controlled burn. Marcus stopped by on the final evening before the rehearsal. He found me on the porch watching fireflies dance above the field, a glass of sweet tea sweating in my hand. The night air carried the sweet scent of blooming jasmine from Grandma's old trellis. You look like a woman making hard decisions, he said, settling into the rocking chair beside me. I am. I told him what I had done, everything except the full depth of the cold satisfaction I felt, watching my father's carefully built illusion stay intact only because I allowed it. Marcus listened without interrupting, his weathered face, thoughtful in the dim porch light. You're protecting Emily, he said finally, but you're also making him face the truth without a safety net. That's not nothing, Becca. I spent my whole life trying to prove I wasn't useless, I said, staring into the darkness. Now I'm the one holding the strings. And part of me doesn't want to cut him loose just yet. I want him to feel what it's like when the person you dismissed holds all the cards. The words sounded harsher out loud than they had in my head, but Marcus didn't flinch. He simply nodded, understanding the weight of old wounds better than most. The morning of the wedding dawned hot and bright. I stood in front of the mirror in Grandma's bedroom, wearing a simple navy dress, the kind of elegant but understated outfit I rarely allowed myself. My medals stayed in their case. Today wasn't about proving anything to strangers. It was about watching the pieces fall exactly where I placed them. As I drove toward the lakeside church, the revenge I had chosen felt less like anger and more like justice wrapped in silence. My father would walk into a perfect wedding he could no longer afford on his own. He would smile and accept congratulations he hadn't earned. And somewhere deep down he would know, because the bank calls wouldn't stop and the suppliers wouldn't forget, that his oldest daughter had become the one thing he never believed she could be. Essential. The lakeside church sat under a bright Carolina sky, white hydrangeas lining the aisle, and ceiling fans spinning lazily against the thick summer heat. I arrived early and took a seat toward the back, my simple navy dress blending into the crowd. Conversations quieted slightly when people noticed me, the whispers from the engagement dinner still fresh. But today wasn't about me. It was Emily's day, and I had made sure nothing would ruin it. The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. Emily walked down the aisle with tears already falling her arm linked with our father's. Earl Hayes looked older in his suit, the fabric hanging a little loose after his hospital stay. He smiled for the cameras, but I saw the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes darted around as if expecting the next phone call from the bank. When Trevor lifted Emily's veil and they exchanged vows, the whole room felt the weight of two people choosing each other despite everything falling apart around them. At the reception hall afterward, the air smelled of fresh flowers, grilled steak, and sweet tea. Candles flickered on linen-covered tables. Then the surprise arrived. A group of Marines in dress blues entered quietly, led by Staff Sergeant Ramirez. They had come unannounced, organized through back channels. The room shifted. Even Trevor's wealthy relatives sat up straighter. One older woman whispered loudly, "Those men are here for Rebecca." Dinner passed in a haze of polite conversation and clinking glasses. I kept my distance from my father, watching him from across the room as he laughed too loudly and shook hands with people who no longer fully believed his stories. Then the toasts began. Trevor stood with a champagne glass smiling at Emily before turning his gaze to me. "I actually want to thank someone else tonight," he said. The room grew quiet. Rebecca. When I first met Emily's family, I thought strength looked like confidence and money and reputation. This week taught me I was wrong. He raised his glass toward me. "You carried more pressure and responsibility than anyone realized, and you did it with quiet grace. I hope I can show even half the integrity you've shown this family." Applause started slow, then built real, warm, and genuine. I nodded once, throat tight. My eyes found my father. He was staring at me, his face pale. Then, to everyone's surprise, Earl Hayes stood up. The room hushed immediately. He cleared his throat twice, gripping the back of his chair. I spent a lot of years misunderstanding my daughter," he began, voice rough. "I thought toughness meant pushing hard, criticizing until someone got stronger." He looked directly at me for the first time all evening. Turns out sometimes it just makes them lonely. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Dad's hand trembled on the chair. "Rebecca, I was wrong about you. Marines respect you. This town's starting to see what I should have seen years ago." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry." It wasn't a full confession, but it was more than I had ever expected. Applause followed softer this time. People wiped their eyes. Emily hugged him tightly. I remained seated, hands folded in my lap, feeling the strange mix of relief and lingering anger. Later, after most guests had left and Emily and Trevor departed for their honeymoon suite, my father found me outside near the parking lot. The night air was cooler now, carrying the scent of lake water and distant rain. He looked exhausted, leaning against his old truck. "You paid for all this, didn't you?" he asked quietly. No accusation, just tired resignation. I didn't deny it. Emily deserved her day. He rubbed a hand over his face. "I don't need your charity, Becca." "It wasn't charity," I said, turning to face him fully. My voice stayed calm but carried every year of pain. "It was necessity. Because despite everything you've said and done, I still won't let my sister suffer for your pride." The words poured out then, years of silence finally breaking. "You called me lazy in front of strangers. You told people my greatest talent was doing nothing. For 36 years I carried that. Every promotion, every deployment, every time I came home, I was still trying to prove to you that I wasn't worthless." My voice didn't shake. I buried Marines I cared about. I led men and women through hell, and you stood in that restaurant and reduced me to a joke. Dad looked away, jaw working. For once he didn't interrupt. "I could have let it all fall apart," I continued. "The garage, the house, your reputation. Part of me wanted to, but I didn't. Not for you, for Emily, and for the little girl who used to sweep floors in your garage, hoping one day her father would look at her with pride instead of disappointment." He took a shaky breath. His face had gone ashen. "Becca, I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I cut in firmly. "That's the difference. I'm not asking you to fix 30 years tonight, but things are going to change. I won't keep rescuing you while you keep wounding me. If you want a relationship with me, you earn it. Starting with honesty." For a long moment, only the sound of crickets and distant thunder filled the space between us. Then my father did something I had rarely seen. He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I hear you," he whispered. I'm scared, Becca. The garage is slipping away. I don't know how to fix it." "I know," I said. "But you're not facing it alone anymore, just not on your old terms." He reached out hesitantly and squeezed my shoulder, the same shoulder he had gripped so carelessly at the dinner. This time his hand was trembling. For the first time in my life, Earl Hayes looked like a man who finally understood the cost of his words. As I drove back to the farmhouse that night, the weight on my chest felt lighter, though not gone. Revenge had tasted quieter than I imagined. Not destruction, but boundaries. Not cruelty, but truth spoken clearly under starlight. And for the first time, my father had been forced to listen. 3 months had passed since the wedding, and autumn finally arrived in North Carolina like a long, quiet exhale. The heavy summer humidity gave way to crisp mornings where the air carried the scent of fallen pine needles and wood smoke from distant chimneys. At Grandma Lorraine's farmhouse, the leaves on the old oak trees turned gold and deep red, drifting lazily onto the porch, where I now sat most evenings with a cup of coffee watching the fields settle into their winter rest. The anger that had burned so hot in August had cooled into something steadier, less like fire, more like quiet resolve. I drove into town one Saturday morning and found my father outside Hayes Auto Repair, standing on a ladder replacing the faded sign that had hung there for decades. The garage looked different now, cleaner, humbler. He had sold 2 unnecessary trucks and canceled the expensive equipment leases. The building no longer pretended to be bigger than it was. It simply stood honest under the pale autumn sun. Dad climbed down carefully when he saw my truck pull in. His movements were slower since the hospital stay, but there was a new steadiness in them too. "You here for an inspection, Colonel?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. The old mocking tone was gone. In its place was something almost tentative. "Just checking if the place is still standing," I replied, stepping out into the cool air. We worked side by side that morning, the familiar smell of motor oil and rubber wrapping around us like an old blanket. No sweeping emotional speeches, no dramatic revelations. Just the quiet clink of tools and the occasional shared memory about customers from years ago. For the first time, our relationship existed in ordinary moments instead of criticism or silence. Around lunchtime, Dad set down his wrench and looked at me across the engine we were rebuilding. "You know why I missed your commissioning ceremony all those years ago?" he asked quietly. I paused, the old wound still tender. "The garage was busy, you said." He shook his head. I was ashamed. Ashamed that my daughter had become something I didn't understand. An officer. A leader, while I was still just a grease monkey trying to keep the lights on. His voice grew thick. Instead of being proud, I made fun of it. "Made fun of you. I thought if I acted like it didn't matter, maybe I wouldn't feel so small." The honesty in his words settled between us. I saw him clearly then, not just as my father, but as an aging man carrying his own fears, shaped by a harder generation that taught him vulnerability was weakness. It didn't erase the pain, but it softened the edges enough for understanding to take root. "I spent most of my life trying to earn your approval," I admitted, wiping my hands slowly. Every deployment, every promotion part of me was still that little girl sweeping floors, hoping you'd finally say I did something right. Dad's eyes glistened. He looked down at the engine for a long moment. "I'm sorry, Becca. I was wrong. About so many things." His voice cracked. "You're not lazy. You're not useless. You're the strongest person I know." The words I had waited decades to hear didn't bring tears this time. They brought a quiet peace. Not complete forgiveness yet, but the beginning of it. A few weeks later, the town held its annual Veterans Day fundraiser on Main Street. Strings of white lights hung between lampposts and folding chairs filled the square. Older veterans in faded caps sat swapping stories from Korea, Vietnam, and the Gulf. I stood beside my father near the coffee table when an old friend approached. "Earl," the man said with a smile, "you gonna introduce me to this fine officer?" Dad straightened, placing a hand on my shoulder, this time gently. "This is my daughter," he said, voice carrying clearly. "Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Hayes, United States Marine Corps. She's the bravest person I know." The pride in his voice was real. No performance, no audience to impress. Just a father finally seeing his daughter. I felt something deep inside my chest shift and settle into place. Life didn't transform overnight. Dad still struggled with the garage. I still carried scars from years of being torn down. But we were trying awkwardly honestly, one shared Saturday and one careful conversation at a time. I accepted the training position at Camp Lejeune, close enough to come home on weekends, but far enough to protect the new boundaries I had set. Some wounds heal slowly. The important thing is that they heal. Standing there under those autumn lights, listening to my father speak my name with genuine respect, I understood something important. Revenge isn't always loud or destructive. Sometimes it's simply refusing to let old pain define you. Sometimes it's building a life so solid that even the person who hurt you most eventually has to acknowledge its worth. And sometimes when they do, you find you no longer need them to fall, you just need them to finally see you. If you've ever carried deep wounds from family, if you've ever loved someone who hurt you with their words, or if you're still waiting for the apology that may never come, I hope this story stays with you. People can change even slowly. Words can wound for decades, but truth spoken in love can begin to heal them. The strongest thing we can do isn't always revenge. Sometimes it's choosing to stop passing pain forward and daring to build something better instead. I'd love to know how this story touched you. Did it remind you of your own family journey? Have you faced a similar moment of reckoning with a parent or child? Leave a comment below and share where you're watching from. Your stories matter, and they remind all of us we're not alone on this road. We have many more heartfelt tales like this one ready to share with you every week, so please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss when a new one arrives. Thank you for spending this time with me. Let's keep walking each other home, one honest story at a time.